Welcome to the Relocated South African, a show for navigating immigration from South Africa for a better future. Today we are joined by a very special guest, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Stephen Phyffer, the founder of Oorsee.com.
Hi, Jan. Thanks for having me. It's a real honor. I don't always get people contacting me for the interview. I've had a few, but normally I'm contacting them.
I know exactly what you mean. And for me, it is really a privilege because I've looked at what you do with Oorsee. I've watched some of your interviews this weekend when you were away and showing people what it's like living overseas. I think that's one of the things that I want to achieve with my podcast, is to just share what it's like to immigrate and to live overseas. So if I can kick off, how and when did you start Oorsee?
Wow. So Oorsee, and so those people listening, it's Oorsee.com. The reason, first of all, if you wonder why we've picked an Afrikaans name, is because Oorsee is such a universal word, for that matter. Everyone that's from South Africa, whether you're English or Afrikaans or Zulu or Xhosa, you know what that word means. For the most part, people know that Oorsee means overseas or abroad. So my wife and I, it's sort of a personal story that we made public in a sense, because I've been asked this question a lot of times. So every time people ask me this question, I always share the personal details of it. So basically, we've immigrated in 2015 from South Africa to the UK because that's where my in-laws lived, and we had my son, and which they never saw. So we figured, well, let's go and work over there for a bit because we had an opportunity, and then they can also build a relationship with my son. And after 3 years, we decided, well, look, this is all great, but not a great place to raise kids, because by then I've had my daughter. So then we moved to Australia. Australia, in all sense, is wonderful. It's a wonderful country. It's beautiful. It's got lots of everything that you can imagine. Everything that you love as a South African. It's camping, it's swimming, it's diving, it's fishing, it's hunting, it's everything. But the one thing that we found Australia sort of didn't have quite as much as the UK is that sense of welcoming from your own kind. Because in the UK, whenever you bump into South Africans, they sort of yearn for each other. They pull to each other like moth to a flame, because it's so miserable in the sense of the weather. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but it was the God's honest truth that we sorted each other out, whether it was in cell groups or just a braai over the weekend. We made an effort to spend time with each other because we were all we had was one another. In Australia, there's so much other things to distract people, and it's totally understandable. So South Africans just don't connect as much with each other as we experience in the UK. They still connect though. We've got braais, we've got picnics, we've got camping trips together and everything. But for the most part, I only see my friends over here every month, or maybe sometimes every 2 months. And if you South African, you would know how un-South African that actually is, which led to my wife and I becoming a little bit lonely. We decided, okay, well, let's go camping for Christmas, for instance. But camping is a very solo affair in sometimes. And while we went camping, other groups of South Africans all over Facebook would have Christmas together. And we had no family and whatsoever. So I told my wife there should be a better way of connecting with South Africans other than Facebook, because it's weird going on Facebook and just reaching out into the void to someone that you don't really know. So I told her on a Sunday afternoon 2 years ago in February that I want to build this app that's going to help bring South Africans together. A social media app, but without all the distractions in it, and with an advanced search feature that will show you other South Africans that lives in the same town or city as you are. And I've thrown many ideas at it because as a developer, there's always stuff flowing through your head, but this is the first time she's actually agreed with me, and my idea got her excited. So together we sat, and quickly, I believe she shot over a couple of names, among which Oorsee was one of them. And I was so excited about it. 2 weeks later, I already had a demo built for the app and in test flight on the App Store. When the app went live on Android first, I just mentioned something about it on one of the Facebook South African groups, and people went crazy for it. I had 600 signups in the first day, a couple of hours really. Then someone else posted it again to another group. And before I know it, 2,000 people were on the app. And as the app grew in popularity, I've redeveloped a couple of parts of it. I've moved the hosting for the app to a better server, made it faster, because the more people go on it, the slower it gets. But yeah, as of today, I think we're about 6,010 or something users. But there's lots of other little bits of stories around the app that helped it grow to what it is today, including obviously the YouTube channel and our Facebook group. But I'll comment on that later, because if I need to tell you the whole story about Oorsee, you're going to take a while.
Okay, no, that's fascinating. And obviously it helps that you're an IT guy. I'm a IT ignoramus, so I'm sure that helped. Is your wife also qualified in IT?
No, my wife is in South Africa, you would know her as a social worker. In Australia, she's known as an advanced child protection practitioner, which is a mouthful, but she protects children.
Okay.
Not the same job as more or less in South Africa. Here it's a bit more full on. You work with the police and you go into the scariest places to get children out. And yeah.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. So just going back to South Africa, I know you lived in Fischhoek. You grew up in the Namaqualand. It's quite a change, Namaqualand, Fischhoek, and UK, Australia. What a journey!
Yeah, no, I've lived all over in South Africa. Really, I was born in Mowbray, Cape Town. My mum married a Namaqualander, and I lived in Calvinia as a small baby. And then from there back to Cape Town, and then back again to Namaqualand and Bitterfontein. Went to school in Van Reinsdorp, Nieuwerus, those places. Back to Cape Town, did school a little bit there, then back to the Great Karoo, then to Fischhoek, and then eventually back to the Karoo. Oh, all over the place. And then I started working eventually in Strand/Gordons Bay in Cape Town, and I absolutely fell in love with the Helderberg. And I speak about the people there often, and I reminisce almost daily about the life we had there. And I'm still in contact with my good friends that I've made there.
Yeah, it's the same for us. We lived, our last home was in Stellenbosch in Desalse before we moved to Europe in 2020. So, yeah, it's something that I guess will never leave us, the fact that where we come from, and that's just the way it is, South Africans. And that's why I think this Oorsee.com, the app, is fantastic in pulling people together. My personal experience is that Facebook is very much a good news sort of medium. So people love to share their good news. But I've found in the interviews that I've done, when you start speaking to people, you actually get a different picture, that sometimes you understand the hardship that people go through, because immigrating is not necessarily always moonshine and roses, as people may think. I guess you'd agree with that.
No, it was a hard journey. And if it wasn't for the help of professional people around us, and a little bit of money that we threw at it. Like Breitenbach's helped us with the paperwork and everything for the UK. And they were expensive in the South African point of view, but now if I think back of it from this end, maybe they weren't that expensive. But I had to sell my business in South Africa in order to afford all of that, which is scary because I got a fairly all right offer for my business, which was also a software development, web development company. And it was bought up by a startup. And a year or two later, Web Africa bought the company, which is pretty big. And I thought, wow, maybe I should have hanged on to it a bit longer. But if it wasn't for the immigration agents and stuff that helped us and advised us and helped in the paperwork, I probably would have not gone through with it, because I'm very intimidated by anything that involves pen and paper.
I can imagine. Yeah, I think that's something that people often underestimate, is the red tape and stuff that's involved. When you move to Europe, which is slightly different, where English is not the first language, the language really becomes a problem. And as you say, it often helps to have lawyers and people who can speak the language to assist with that, because a lot of people get stuck on the process of actually dealing with all the red tape that gets thrown your way. And think back now, living in Australia and building a new life. Would you consider going back to South Africa?
No. Look, it's bittersweet. There's a part of South Africa and a life that I had there that I'll always cherish. And in a way, I'm sad because I never knew when it would end, because I never thought it would end while I was there. We lived in a Strand, like I said. It was pretty much a holiday town, so every day felt like Christmas. Business was doing all right. I don't think I would have survived COVID if I stayed, not in my line of work, but Australia has so much to offer. The people do take getting used to, but it is important to be humble in a sense to know that this is their country, your guest, and you've decided to make this your home. So, as far as you can, you need to climatize to their way of life. But it is important not to let yourself go completely, because being South African is much more than just living in South Africa. We've got great traditions. We've got a fun, colorful, glorious history. Some of it obviously very, very dark and tragic, and we fought many battles to get where we are today. Not that we're always finding ourselves in a very good spot currently. I know the Afrikaners especially is I don't know where they're finding themselves at the moment, but it's important to respect their way of life here. But you'll also be surprised to find that they actually love the South African way of things as well. And they're quite receptive to learn from us, to do things the way that we do things often, like they'll braai like we braai. They'll watch rugby like we watch rugby. There's just so much we can learn from each other. And for that reason alone, I'm calling it a sacrifice, because it is exactly what it is. Because for me, who grew up in such a diverse setting in South Africa, in all different kinds of places, I've seen the best of everything. I've had the surf life down in Fisher. I'm snorkeling over the weekends with my friends. I had hunting with my father in the Namakoland, shooting dassies just for the fun of it on a Saturday afternoon, fishing in the Weskus, kreefduik. I had everything that you can possibly imagine South Africans do. I've had that life. But I know my children are better off for it, having another life here in Australia. They probably wouldn't have had the same quality of life in the UK, but they've got a great one in Australia. And for that, I'll be forever grateful.
I think that's such a good perspective to have. I have a son in America, and they've just qualified for American citizenship. They got their passports and they're going back to South Africa because his kids are 12 and 9, and he wants to go and show them what life would have been like if they'd stayed in South Africa. Because he says, he sends them, they go play in the park and they walk home, and it's something that kids can't do in South Africa. So it's a different way of life. And I think it's very important that people and children and everyone must understand, what this new life is. Just another question on the South African thing, because I think you guys are doing an amazing job in terms of promoting South African art and theatre. And I mean, your interview with Ben Foss and your interview with the Kifness and all the people that you have interviewed, because I think that's another angle that Oorsee brings and that you bring to the Australian community of South Africans. So it's very important, but you're not trying to take over Australia. Yeah. Whereas I find here in Europe, especially, and we're living in Portugal, a lot of the English people that come here want to create a little England here. Mm-hmm. And there's English bars and Irish pubs and so on. And that's where they go and they sit and watch sport, but they don't integrate into the community. And whereas, my attitude is exactly what you're saying. We're living here. We're a guest in their country. We must embrace what they bring, and we're still a guest here. So, and it will forever be like that. We can stick to our tradition. So I think it's very interesting perspective. I assume your kids were all born in Australia?
No. My son was born in South Africa, in Somerset West, Clinic. Okay. And my daughter was born in Guildford in the UK. Okay. And my youngest, Hannah, she was born here in Australia. Okay. She's also, at this stage, the only Australian citizen in our family. She's got an Australian passport. We're all permanent residents. Our application is submitted, thank goodness. So hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll get our own passports and we can go travel a bit, because the Australian passport has a way of opening doors, which you would have struggled to open with the Groen Mamba.
Big time. Have you been back to South Africa in the last 10 years?
2017. My wife and I and Ludwig and Isabella went back for 6 weeks. I think I went back and had the time of my life. I was so in love with my own country. I almost went back permanently. But then I realized, and I told myself, I slapped myself around a bit. I said, Stephen, remember, it's a holiday. You've got pounds in your pocket. Those pounds are worth very little back in the UK, really. But it went quite a long way in South Africa. And I had a fantastic holiday. I was paying for lunches and dinners and just everything I couldn't do when I was living over there. Like just take my family to Super Tube was doable because it was affordable for me.
Yeah.
But that was the last of it. And I've got my stepmother and my stepbrother and sisters all still there, and I miss them dearly. And I really want to go and visit. My stepfather passed away in 2019 December, just before COVID hit, and I couldn't go to his funeral. I just didn't have the money to do it. I mean, for a family of five, it's going to cost us about like $8,000 round trip just for the flying. And then you somehow need to still afford a rental car, and it's an expensive. So for those of you that know me that ask me why not coming to visit, that's why it's expensive. Come and visit me.
Yeah, that's very true. And if you think about the country during COVID, we were there and we literally left on the first non-repatriation flight out of South Africa on 1 October 2020. So I guess it was probably COVID that led us to leave, because my daughter and my son had left, and my wife's daughter she was living in Isle of Man. So, and my daughter's in Dublin and my son is in Dallas. So we have people all over the world. Funnily enough, he makes biltong in Dallas. He's actually got
you said, I remember that.
business.
That's great.
Quite
Look
nice.
me up with an interview. I'd love to talk to him. I want to see how the beef-eating Dallas people loves his biltong.
Okay, I'll tell him. Stephen, is there anything you would have done differently if you have to advise somebody now on emigrating from South Africa?
Spend little. When you move abroad, you're coming, it depends. It depends the scenario. So we came with nothing. We sold all our furniture back home. I sold a business. We came home with, went over to the UK with about 2,000 or 3,000 pounds in our pocket. And we could afford the first month's bond and rent on a house and a small car. But then that should have been enough. And then your main target, and I'm giving you financial advice, official financial advice, because I've been down that road. You have lost out on pension. If you move abroad, say for instance, you're between the age of 25 and 35, you essentially have lost 10 to 15 years of pension, which those people that live in those countries and are born in those countries, they've already saved up for in some way or the other, depending on what your country's pension scheme looks like. Don't go and spend too much. Focus on what is important. Drive that small car for as long as you can. Put your kids in public school if you can get away with it. Save wherever you can possible and put every penny away until you can buy a house and then put in extra in your retirement. And I'm saying this as a 41-year-old man. I still have a good 70-something years in there. I can still work for a long. But if I look back, I could have a lot of things that we still lack today. We could have gotten already, and I could have, in a sense, secured my family even more than I have already. But temptation on, maybe we just need a little bit of a bigger car. It's so nice just to drive a bakkie in Australia. Why not buy that new Raptor? Those things are stuff that I fell for. And if I can do it again, I don't know, I'll probably make the same mistakes. But for those of you out there that's more strong-willed than I am, save your money. And then when the time is right, listen to your heart, pray about it. When the time is right, you'd know when to make good decisions for your family. You don't have to be all stingy and not spoil your kids with a Domino's or McDonald's over the weekend. Do that. But save on the subscriptions and those things. I can go on and on. Look, there's probably more emotional sort of advice that I can give and everything. I'm focusing straightforward to the practical. That's where I'd start, because that's going to prevent other things like stress, unnecessary arguments, all those sorts of things.
I think that's very sound advice. I also, a while ago, listened to an interview you did with a lady in America. I think she was in Maryland, the psychologist who started a group for South African women, because that's the other part of this thing that I think people often underestimate is the psychological, emotional stress that comes with leaving. Because when you decide to leave, it's all excitement and so on until you get there. And it's not an easy life. So I would always suggest that people must look for help. And this is where, again, a community like Oorsee, where people are like-minded, they've experienced it. And, people shouldn't be shy to go and ask because it's tough.
No, I totally agree. I can elaborate on that a little bit because I think she said one thing very, very important that I still remember is the fact that don't be scared to reach out to Facebook groups and those sorts of groups. Yes, I know I started my own social media app because I wasn't quite happy with how South Africans connects on Facebook, but sometimes it is the only option you have. And when you're a woman and you got small children, you're alone abroad or whatever the scenario is, reach out to those groups because you'd be surprised the amount of help and support that you'll get.
I agree. That is absolutely true. People should do that. If I turn to other things, I was watching the Melbourne Grand Prix. I saw it was raining miserably yesterday. You're a bit of a petrol head, aren't you?
It's hard because I've bought myself a bakkie, like you've probably figured in my previous statement. And I've never thought I would because I never really cared much for cars. I really don't. But when you're here, Australians have a problem with tailgating. They'll sit on top of you like the whole time.
Okay.
And I bought like a Jeep Cherokee old car when I got here, sold it, and I bought like a Kia people carrier so I can get all my whole family into the car if we want to drive somewhere. But eventually that grew old and I had to get something else. So I thought myself, I'm going to buy a bakkie, a big one, so that I don't get bothered by people tailgating me the whole time. And it worked. As dumb as it sounds, it helps driving something bigger. And that's as far as my petrol headness goes because I don't really know much about cars. I'm not a big Formula One viewer. I wouldn't say I'm not a fan. I'm just not a viewer. And my mother-in-law had this discussion with me yesterday because she's currently visiting. And my father-in-law was a massive Formula One fan. But it's like cage fighting. It's one of those things that just doesn't make sense to me. Why would watching the cars go in circles, and then it's done. But then there's a skill set to it. I mean, the ability to pass another car in close corners and those things I know is something that's wonderful to experience. But in my time, when Formula One was a thing, Michael Schumacher was winning everything. So it got really boring after a while. So no, I'm not as big a petrol head as you would think, but I do know the Grand Prix is on in Phillip Island. We regular visitors of Phillip Island. I've actually kayaked because I'm a big fishing fan.
Okay.
While I've been in Australia, one of the things I wasted my money on is I bought a boat. I sold the boat eventually because it's hard work getting the boat in and out the water. I still have my skipper's license though, but I bought a Hobie kayak, which is a kayak you paddle with your feet. I absolutely love that thing. I've got two. Well, one is my son's. So I've kayaked with that thing from here across a couple of kilometers to Phillip Island, where they actually had the Grand Prix.
Oh, wow.
Loads of fun.
Okay. I used to visit Melbourne in my working days. I was on a board there. I used to go to Australia a few times a year.
Right.
But Melbourne's a lovely city. I love it.
Yeah.
But this is another fact that I don't think people may know, but your bakkie is your bakkie or your car that got stolen in Australia?
Did I mention that in one of my interviews?
I saw it on Facebook.
That's right, yes. My first bakkie I bought was a Wildtrak X model. 2020, I bought it brand new. I love that bakkie. It just kept going. And on 90,000 kilometers, I decided I'm going to sell it. And I'm going to buy an old second-hand Raptor, the Ranger model, because I just cannot afford the F-150 at this stage. But I really like the old shape of it. And this car had a ton of kilometers on it and everything. And I figured, well, it's got a full service history. It's a really cheap price. I'm just going to drive it until it breaks. And then I think I had it a month and it got stolen from my driveway.
Goodness gracious. You felt like you were back in SA.
Well, that didn't even happen to me in SA. I've been held at gunpoint. I've been stabbed several times driving the train and everything in South Africa. But my car's never been stolen. And for some reason, that felt worse. So I have to say, though, they found it the same day.
Yeah, no, that I saw. No, I just thought it was quite an interesting angle. So I've got two more questions. The one is, You speak to a lot of South Africans on your app and through your Facebook. Is there a common thread that runs through your conversations with South Africans?
Um, I don't know. I never really focus on one specific question. I always approach the conversation as just a good chat. And normally, most of the time, they will just start talking. And the main question that always sort of pops to mind is what brought you over?
Mm-hmm.
And because that's the goal, that's where the advice is for the next guy that wants to go over. Because then they start telling you the nitty gritty part of it. What was the hard part of it? What was the good stuff of it? What would you do different? Same good questions that you asked me. But I never really go in with a certain angle unless it's a high profile interview and the people that help me set it all together gives me a checklist of rules that I need to follow.
Okay.
Like I did with Ilandre is a good example. His management was quite strict. You need to send us the whole interview prior to actually talking to him. I totally went off script because I never follow what I said. And Ilandre was really nice about it, and he loved the interview, and he said, "You publish it just the way it is." Lurika Rach, for instance, she wanted to know the script more or less beforehand because she likes to prepare. And what a lovely lady, and she did. And I had it was a really good conversation with her. And but other than that, everyone was quite chill, and we just talk away.
Okay, because I also listened to Larica. I mean, she was, more my time. I'm 67, so we more of the same ilk. But I love her music anyway. So that is really interesting because I think you're very fortunate that you're in a place now where you're interviewing these really interesting people. I mean, I love the Kiffness. I think I love what he stands for. He's not shy to say what he believes in, and which is refreshing in today's world. But if you have to cut through all the interviews, who's the most interesting one that you've done?
Wow, that's a good question. And now it's a hard one for me to answer because I've interviewed people that I admire, like Joe Black. I really admire him, and his music really built into me. Before I actually try and remember who was my favorite, the thing about these artists that I interview, it comes from a place of longing, because when I'm abroad, I feel very far away from that life. So sometimes I sit and I catch myself and I realize, oh, Stephen, you're busy forgetting. You're even talking like an Aussie. So what I do is I reach out to them. But that's what I did with Joe Black. I reached out to his sister, which I didn't know was his sister. It's actually his manager. And she said, oh, well, he would love to talk to you, because by then I already had 1,000 subscribers or something. And we had a great chat and he loved it. And then he came to Melbourne. I went to go see him. And through him, I met the owner of SA Events. And he then contacted me and said, listen, I love your app. I would like to acquire 10% of it. And so things snowballed. And through SA Events, they obviously very well connected. I got all these other opportunities, and then other agencies in Amsterdam contact me, and then, but in that way, I'm bringing the longing that I have closer to me, and I'm bringing home closer to me. But in all of those interviews, and I love every one of them, they were amazing. They're great people to talk to. I would say one of the best chats I had was probably an old woman who lives on an island not too far from Melbourne, 60 kilometers or so offshore. He bought a little farm there. He grew up studying being a marine psychologist. And he did exactly that, but he was also a huge sci-fi fan, and he ended up writing sci-fi books, and he made a fortune out of it. And he ended up migrating from South Africa, bought himself a farm in this island in between Melbourne and Tasmania, and that's his life. And the conversation probably wasn't as rich in content that would help other people who wants to make that sort of move, because it's a very unique circumstance. But for me, that was special because I was in awe of this South African guy who no one knows. No one knows about him. He looks like something out of one of these old Western movies. And yeah, I don't think the video got that many views. David Freer, I think was his name. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that was one of my favorites. And there was a couple. I've just, when I put down the chat and I looked at my wife and I'm like, gosh, I had a lot of fun talking to this person. Like, for instance, the Kiffness. The Kiffness was a great chat. There's a whole 40-minute clip that I've cut out
Oh, wow.
where he went very political.
Okay.
And I loved every second of it. I'm not a big fan of politics and I try and avoid it in my conversations. But I told his manager, I'm going to give it a couple of weeks, maybe even a month or two, but then I'm going to publish that other 40 minutes as well. And he said, yeah, go for it. That video, that's the
I'd
goal.
love to see him. No, I think he's fantastic.
Mm.
Stephen, on that note, I can only say thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating. If this is the way our podcast is going to go with interviewing people like you, I think we are very fortunate to have you tonight and today for me and tonight for you. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Loved it, and you're doing a great job. This is going to go places.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed hearing about our experience of relocating from South Africa, why not subscribe to the show so you can hear more from people who have left South Africa for a better future abroad. Thanks, and until next time.